Wholeness, welcome. This is Josh of Inner Skilled and Integrating Presence too. And today I have Aaron Scott with me. Aaron Scott, what's going on today?
Hey Josh, how are you?
Ah, doing okay, I guess. Uh, for anybody seeing the video, Aaron's got some quite a bit of light going on, which is cool. So who is Aaron Scott? And that's a pen name, I think, right? And then what kind of work does he do?
So Aaron Scott, it's funny, kind of in this paradigm, if you will, everybody sort of associates identity with performance. So I will jump into that paradigm for a second. So I have about 2 decades of experience on Wall Street. I actually started my own hedge fund about 3 years ago, and really over the course, I think of my life, this timeline, I have always had, kind of an inherent thirst for knowledge. And admittedly, I've never really been satisfied with that sort of performance based lens, although I've certainly subjected myself to it by way of, I'm sure, indoctrination and things of that nature. And I've kind of decided, maybe about a year ago, to kind of form a nice tangent and begin really exposing not necessarily the Wall Street industry, but sort of the inherent disconnection that we globally, especially in the West, experience on a systemic level, and how that has eroded a large part of the individual identity, but also humanity as a whole. And that's really been kind of my effort uh, to date. So hopefully that gives you a nice background. I just lost you there. Hold on just one second.
No, no, it's me. It's my
That's you.
bad.
Okay.
My bad. I had the mute on when I'm not talking. I
Sorry. Sorry.
forgot this. Not good form. Yep, that's all me. So performance, right? High performance. How well are we going to be performing when we get to the grave? Right? So
Exactly.
like, are we? How fast can we get to our death? you know, how what's that going to be like on our deathbed? How much we've accomplished, and how well we've done it, how proficient, and people will then turn to legacy and things like this. But still, where's that on the deathbed, right? And then usually people get into these spiritual things of how well have I loved, and um, that's kind of the big question at the end of the day. But I don't want to stray into too many like metaphysical or deep spiritual things here, because your expertise, I don't think, lies in that quite yet, nor mine either. So the things that are coming to mind right now are black, dark pools, and Aladdin. So I don't know why I'm thinking that now. And then, of course, central bank digital currency. So those are three big topics, I think, or at least ones that I'm interested in. And I know originally reached out to you, and I know this is not financial advice and stuff, but what about people who can't? What do they do with their money if they're not accredited investors? Because, I mean, the investment options that the public have, come on, man, to me, it's a lot of greenwashing, whitewashing it. We'll get into the environmental social governance thing, which I think is a primary huge joke for the most part. I mean, yes, it sets a good precedent that when it really rolls out and things get more legit, that we can make a difference. But I mean, some of this stuff, what little I know about it, it's kind of laughable that they're actually, some of these corporations are doing something that's as meaningful as they could be, and as responsible and helpful as they could be. But anyway, so we've got those three things, right? Central bank digital currency, dark pools, Aladdin, and then that. So that's plenty on your plate to go after there.
Yeah. So you look, I think that you bring up, an important point. I just want to kind of touch on it, which is, you know, inherent to investing, right? You have, and I think this is just kind of the structure of corporate America, and especially on the globalist scale, right? Where profit takes precedent over everything else. And this, by the way, is an inherent flaw, I believe. And companies and commerce and systems were not always based on that sort of exchange, right? There were sacred exchange systems. There were, I'm actually a shameless plug here. I'm actually writing a book on sort of how that transformation took place and ways to return to sort of sacred economies and what that really means, right? So when you're an individual and you're looking to invest, you have to kind of deal with that schism, right? You have to say, look, I'm obviously looking to um, return profit on my investment, but at the same time, if you're a conscious investor, you're not looking to necessarily just kind of go in on what's the most profitable. Because in many ways, when you invest and you increase a company's kind of capitalization, they use that obviously as leverage to either tap the market for more debt. They can use that to leverage in many other ways, right? So again, there's this sort of push pull. And I think that, again, when you're investing, especially in today, and I think that this is well recognized, especially with what we've seen in social media, um, with the way that we have this global reach. I think that people are becoming more aware and more in tune. I think it's a very exciting time, right? You have these massive sort of truth exposés that you've seen on and mass on, especially in the Western government structure, where you have these deep states that are running sort of willy nilly, doing whatever they want, however they please. You have taxpayers that are being exploited for ideologies that aren't necessarily aligned with really anything other than to perpetrate these kind of schisms and push agenda, which people don't really, I think, recognize. But I think that when you're looking to invest today and you are a conscious investor, you really need to be aware of not just you know PE ratios and ways that again you can increase profit and return, but also what the companies do, how they do it, right? If you look at and this spans across sectors, so you can look at the financial sector. Obviously, that's rife with issues that range from anything from the way that banks. I believe that there's an inherent conflict with sort of the and I'm doing a podcast episode on this with the idea of the American dream, where people were sold that owning a home is a measure of success and to consume is a sort of patriotic duty. But inherent and embedded with homeownership, if you look at the mortgage market, for example, what you're really getting is you're really getting a sort of debt burden. In many cases, a lifelong debt burden. A 30-year fixed mortgage. Who's really benefiting? If you look at again return on equity with a home, let's say, it's certainly not an asset. It's really a liability. And the ones who reap the rewards are the banks, who are making, let's say, 2 to 3 times on their mortgage issuance, right, as a lender, and really have no risk. They have a secured loan tied to your house, and they have many ways. If you default, they win, and if you pay, they win, right? So there are so many systemic issues with the financial system, obviously, and with the banks, with retailers, global
Well,
retailers, corporate, yeah.
I mean, you get to the root of it, though, is the money system itself. Fiat currency, basically created out of thin air, based on debt. I just don't understand how student loans can be considered an asset. It's a liability unless they get paid back. So I just don't understand how debt can be considered an asset. To me, debt is like if you owe me $500. That's how can you consider that something good that you want? I don't know. It just doesn't seem like common sense to me. But and then basically creating money out of thin air based on threat of going to war. That's, I mean, kind of what it's based on, and it's ones and zeros in a computer. And and the whole system really can't be audited independently without the full transparent one that I know of. So we don't so we don't know. I mean, at the very core, I don't think people even understand, and a lot of people even in the financial industry, and I don't know the full ins and outs of it either, but just how money, quote unquote, money comes into being and how it works at the core level anyway, you know.
Yeah,
So
yeah, for sure, for sure. And look, you touch on an important point, which is, we have a credit-based monetary system where we print money out of thin air. And you're right, people don't understand that. And you touched on, central bank digital currencies and
the, the
cryptocurrencies.
the
Yeah,
the Federal Reserve System, the World Bank System, Bank of International Settlements, IMF, you know, all this stuff that's very complex that most people have no idea about, and I don't know the full ins and outs of it either, you know. But yeah,
yeah. I mean,
so
I can touch on some of that if you'd like. The Federal Reserve, if you look at its inception, was a sort of way to plug the uh, the dislocations and chaos that were taking place at the turn of the, or really, the turn of the, or the end of the 19th and turn of the 20th century, where you had again massive market disruptions, and you had this kind of cabal of bankers who got together and they drafted legislation that was accepted by Congress. But it really, at the end of the day, it's serving banking interest, and people don't understand that. It really, at its core, is, it's kind of a quasi public institution, but you have who owns the Fed, right? The Fed is a private entity. It's not regulated by Congress. There's no partisan, or there's no democratic intervention. There's no electorate that governs. And who owns the Fed? Well, you have these private regional banks, right? And they're private, right? They have shares and they receive guaranteed dividends. And if you look at who these stakeholders are, it's Citigroup, it's J.P. Morgan, and so, and this is operating under the guise of stability. And but in truth, if you look at Fed policy, you have this continuous 2% inflation mandate. Well, why do we have a 2% inflation mandate? Why do we have to be continuing to grow? And whose interest does that 2% mandate serve? Well, it serves the asset holders. It serves the financial institutions, and that again furthers the schism between the normal individual, the normal citizen, and the banking interest. So, when we talk about investing, we talk about digital currencies and cryptocurrencies. This is a wonderful way to kind of like put your stake in the ground and say, listen, this fiat currency, people, I think that, colloquially we can call it kind of a pyramid scheme in many ways, although it's not technically one. But again, you're putting money out of thin air. With these cryptocurrencies, you're saying, look, we have a way to peg to a store of value. And we are saying, look, this is real value. This is not artificial fiat currency that is inflated to create value for the assets that are part of the system, that are part of the way that this mechanism operates. So, that is a great way to express that. And it's been expressed, and people have gravitated towards that.
well, I see that argument too. I see the other side as well, though, that, it's just more, blips, and then that, hedge funds are involved in that, and who all knows who's all invested. But not only that, we don't really know what the plans are long term for that. The stable coin thing. Like, are they going to use that for a digital control system where get rid of all cash, and then you social credit, tie it to a social credit score, track and trace everything, get, yeah, influence people's behavior with it too. So yeah, but I do see the upsides of it too, like being more decentralized, and people have more power over some assets and things like that. It's more instantaneous without all the fees. Like, some of the banks will hold, put a big deposit in, and they claim they need all this time to do it. Well, probably they're investing it in the background when they could get it to me more instantaneously. So yeah, it's not really a super simple thing. Plus, all the technical side of it, it's way beyond me, trying to understand how it works from a technical aspect. I have no idea how all that, I mean, some little bit theory, but if I were to go in down to the code level, not a single clue, how to create something like, we don't know really the origins of Bitcoin. I mean, there's some people, so yeah, there's just so much to that. So yeah, I can see it, but then again, the people in power, a lot of them want to just stay in power, and so they just want to change. I don't know, rearrange the furniture some ways. So I'm not sold on these things yet either, but I'm not against them as well. We've got even bigger things now, like this notion that if you look into just about most of the major stocks, right, they're owned, like a huge portion is owned by Vanguard and BlackRock, right? And then they own each other. And that's kind of anonymous too, right? How do you see that whole thing? And I mentioned Aladdin, this proprietary trading system by BlackRock that controls how many assets, and who all has access to that, and how
Yeah,
that
let me
works.
yeah, let me let me
So
sp- yeah, let me speak to
sure,
that.
just
I'll try to
mhm,
provide some light. So,
sure,
there's certainly an important delineation between cryptocurrency and central bank, centralized digital money, right? So, these concerns that you bring up are prevalent with respect to the centralized digital money, right? You have these privacy risks. You have, programmability concerns. You have control over access, right? Where like authorities or central banks could freeze or impose certain conditions. You have, the social credit systems that exist in China, right? This is all sort of part and parcel to that methodology or that ideology, if you will, for lack of a better word. And I would say that Aladdin, I think Aladdin doesn't necessarily create the necessary or necessarily the concerns. I look at Aladdin more as like sort of an execution system, right? And actually they vend that out. I actually know I know the head of Aladdin, interestingly enough, who runs it. But it's kind of, I look at it as more of like an EMS or like an execution system where other people actually can use it internally for their fund, or if they're, even a broker dealer can use Aladdin as a third party vendor, if you will. But when you get into those systems, you run into issues with dark pools, which you mentioned, right, where you're kind of going in and orders are hidden, right? They're not placed on an exchange, if you will. They're kind of sent to the large executing brokers or the large broker dealers. Citadel has become a massive player in the space. BlackRock, although certainly a large investor, they're not doing the broker dealing, right? So, but when you take an order and it goes into a black pool, it's never hitting the market. So in many ways, you could look at that as kind of market manipulation, because it's supposed to, market execution is supposed to be emblematic or representative of orders being fed, right? You have a bid and you have an offer. You have a price someone's willing to pay and a price someone's willing to sell at. So if you're hiding those prices and they're being executed in a dark pool, they're never hitting the exchange. They're never hitting the actual execution platform that's supposed to be transparent and representative of real sort of market dynamics, right? So I think that's maybe where you run into these issues. Now, this presented itself and still does to this day, and it's the retail investor, it's a common investor who is really getting nicked when it comes to that stuff, because they don't know if they're getting best execution. And you run into these orders. If you put in like a market order, you're kind of like, they can hold your order. And there was actually a trade I did a few years ago after COVID, and it sat out there for like 4 minutes. And I called up, this is my personal account, I called up the broker, and I said, what's going on with this? And they said, oh, we're working at it, we're looking. And then my order gets executed and it's like way off market, and I'm trying to track it on Trace and see where the price was, and it was just executed at the worst price, because it was most likely fed into a dark pool that was executed. Just so these are real, certainly systemic issues that the everyday investor faces, for sure.
so with that How do you think these black projects are being funded? Not think, but like, what can you say about these? Have you heard of these unacknowledged special access programs? All the money missing right before 9/11 happened, and then that was reported. And I've heard so many different things on how these projects are getting funded. The things that they can neither confirm or deny, like even the president, five-star generals can't be read into. They're not allowed. To whatever degree they need funding, and then you get people in the world who are just have so much money they couldn't even spend in generations. So at that point, money doesn't really mean much at all to them. They're on to well, I guess power, and control and things like that. So yeah, what can you say to this stuff?
Look, I think that the black projects, I think that the kind of the dark funding, or however you want to categorize it, I think that this is a byproduct of, the system. And I think that when you go to trace it, everything kind of goes back, especially in the United States, everything goes back to the taxpayer, right? So they're taking taxpayer dollars, and they're repurposing them into these projects that are that they're hidden from Congress, they're hidden from representatives, and they're put into these programs, and they're mostly,
How do they hide it
um,
though? How do they hide it?
I mean, that they don't have to disclose it, right? So that if they don't have to disclose it, they're not going to. So, and
But
this
on the
is
balance sheets, it just shows like missing, or like, like how do
well,
they
you
do
look
it in
you look at the, you
accounting and
look at
stuff?
the, I don't want to get uh political here, but if you look at the current administration, and what this Doge program uncovered, I mean, there were audits that, first of all, the Pentagon has never passed an audit, right? So this is a symptom of the military industrial complex. That's where these black kind of programs go to. But if you look at what Doge exposed, you had agencies, government agencies that have been operating. Basically, they go unchecked. They're not subject to elections. So you have this deep state problem, and they effectively operate autonomously because they pay off people. They're NGOs that are put in place, and they push agenda. They push agendas, and it's a corrupt system, right? Money rules all. And you talk about individuals who hoard wealth and are looking to accumulate power. And to me, it's funny. I know that I'm not on the mainstream here, on the main line here, but to me, this is a symptom of weakness, right? This is not an expression of power. This is almost, in a way, a byproduct of fear and hoarding, and this is a sickness. We need to understand, and this is one of the biggest illusions that I think we live under as a society today, that we operate under the illusion that we are separate from one another, right? This connection, and this is an illusion. This is a pervasive illusion. We are in truth connected, interconnected on an ecological level, a biological level, a spiritual level, in many
Interdependent,
in many ways.
too.
And you have
Yeah.
these ideologies, like the Darwinian ideology of the survival of the fittest. And this is a flawed ideology. And it's proven on a biological level that we have ecosystems that are dependent upon one another. It is not one species that is dominating that survives and thrives. In fact, it's the opposite. If we had if we were operating under a true sort of liberalism framework that was crafted by thinkers like John Locke or Adam Smith, there were warning signs, there were guardrails that said, look, this cannot operate unchecked. If it operates unchecked, you run into corruption, you run into decay. And what we've seen, this is something that I talk about a lot in my upcoming book and in my podcasts, we are operating under a sick system. We are operating in a system that is confused, that is diluted, and that is in many ways creating, again, perpetrating these schisms, and is hurting people's psyche, is hurting people spiritually, because they don't understand the true nature of the world, of their existence, right? And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to bring to light how, and again, I'm not trying to promote myself here. I'm trying to kind of discuss this in an intellectual framework. You have a world that's being created through sickness to promote ideology based on, again, consumerism and consumption And this is not an evolved way of thinking. This is a devolved way of thinking, and it creates real sickness across the globe, and you see it. How do we have a religious institution like the Catholic Church who hoards billions of dollars, and we have women and children that are dying and starving in third world countries? I mean, this is such an obvious example, but how is that? How is that a sign of strength on the part of humanity? How is that a
Well,
sign of
sure.
growth and evolution?
Well, sure. It's yeah, I want to be careful about using this word sickness because the last time I made this connection too, not to be superstitious, this is superstitious, but for a fact, seeing the real sickness in the world, then this COVID thing rolled out, right? So yeah, it's almost like, oh, accusing these people of being sick. Well, look what happens then. But no, there is kind of yeah, no, it just doesn't seem right. It just takes a little bit of contemplation to start observing and putting these things together. It's not really that hard. It can be terrifying for people, just waking up to some of this stuff. But yeah, it's so, like, what are some of the solutions? There's a few things in there that now I'm completely blanking on, but they'll come back if they're important. So, like, some solutions. How do we? I think a lot of us see what's going on, but like, what do we do about it? I mean, surely it's not going to be more politics and crypto is the only way, right? And there's other solutions here too.
Yeah, I think that look, there are many ways there are many ways to kind of approach solutions. I think that at least my approach is, and I know many other, light workers or healers, through processes like meditation and looking for ways to awaken spiritually, right? People are touching on higher levels of consciousness. They're reaching into planes unseen. And I think that in many ways that is obviously it's transcendental. It should be a part of everyone's way of life, right? So it's about, for me, it's about reframing things. It's about giving people perspective and understanding, and allowing people to say, to slow down, right? Take a breath. People are almost in many ways operating like robots. They wake up, they try to accumulate as much money as possible. They go home, they go to sleep, they rinse, repeat. They're spending, 50% of their waking hours in an effort to accumulate money. This is not a way, and people go their lives thinking that this is the way to live, right? And it's a symptom of the system, and it's a symptom. And I can go into the origins of this, especially in the West,
Well,
but it's a
Edward
symptom.
Edward Bernays is a huge thing. I'm sure you're familiar with the way he kind of things change with his programming too. But yeah, yeah, definitely continue. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, no, no. Yeah, and I think that, at least with my approach, I'm looking to enlighten people. I'm looking for people to understand things, not in a dogmatic way, but to give them a perspective that might make them say, look, maybe this isn't the right path for me. I've been unhappy for a decade, 2 decades, and I'm doing things, the end justifies the means for most people in this paradigm, and in this timeline. Maybe that isn't the right approach. I'm not being nourished internally. I'm not being nourished. My soul's not being nourished. Yes, I'm accumulating, and I'm protecting and creating a good life for my children. But are you? And what are you willing to give up for that? And what world are you structuring, and are you supporting for your children that you think is the right way to structure a world? Is that the right way? So it's about giving people the tools and the understanding to see past these illusions. And these illusions transcend many planes, right? We can get into a metaphysical discussion, but and that's really my goal, is to say, listen, maybe the system that you were brought up in, that you were indoctrinated in, that you think is the only path, that everybody else is doing and everybody else is adhering to and going along with, maybe that's not the right way. And I think that any evolution of consciousness begins with the individual. The problem is that what you run into is you have such a pervasive system, and you have such an indoctrination on many levels, especially with, we can talk about the normative nature of the education system. You wake up, you go to school, you sit there, you are taught that performance is what's important. The grade, the the uh, the job. This is the measure of success. But what if that's not success? What if there's another level to things? And why has that happened? Why has that been the the ground, the fertile ground that we have accepted, right? So it's about bringing light to these issues. It's about giving people another perspective, and it's about saying, let's slow down. Let's look internally for answers, not just the performative external, right, measures of success. And this is really, I think, a way to enact change. And if you can get enough people to shift perspective and look at things differently, that I believe is how real shift takes place.
Totally agree. There's a humming, just so you know. I don't know if that's the computer or something in your environment. It shouldn't matter. It will. I think it will go out on the.
I hear it faintly. I think there's like construction going. I live in
That's
Manhattan, so
yeah,
there's
yeah.
always
That's
something.
probably. I was thinking that too.
I
Something outside.
apologize. I
It's probably
apologize. I
like
can
a
try to.
jackhammer. No, no, no.
Yeah, yeah.
It will get it out. So I'm wondering, is it going to take will it take a financial crash to have that happen on a kind of system wide level? Do you think this? Some people talk about a financial reset, or do you think that's in the cards for this to happen? And do you think this thing you're coming on to now, which I think more and more people are waking up to, I had the, I guess, misfortune or good fortune really early on to see that, the standard program they're handing me is not going to work for me. I don't want that. It caused me a lot of trouble growing up, but in a way, I'm glad that it did, in a way that I got through it now. So in that sense, I'm that far ahead, I guess, so to speak, but I'm behind in a lot of other ways, because I was kind of an outlier and whatever. So, but anyway, yeah, I would love for people to wake up on an individual level and to have this happen. But I would imagine there's some interests out there that want to capitalize on that and just completely crash whatever we have and start something over. We've got the technocrats with the current administration, and the technocracy and the technate and all this stuff that's just kind of looming with Palantir, the control systems. We already have a soft social credit system. It's social media and credit scores, but it can go way more from that. So it's just going to be reset and capitalized and centralized into a few really ambitious and controlling tech magnates that will run all the algorithms and getting people to basically become dependent on their decision making from AI, and whoever controls the algorithms are going to be in charge now after if they were to do a reset or something like that. The other thing, if we are going to get into metaphysical stuff, along maybe these lines, is if there was an Atlantis, and some of the things we've heard about Atlantis and what caused the downfall of that is, just to oversimplify, maybe, is misuse of technology, and in certain groups kind of wanting to recreate an Atlantis type civilization. And, I just don't know if even some people talking about it falling multiple times due to the same types of abuses and power grabs and misuse of technology and power. So I don't know where I'm going with this, but I guess the more immediate thing is the what do you think about this thing that a lot of people are talking about, a planned crash and reset? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not familiar with the idea of a planned crash and reset. What I can tell you is that inherent to our current system are booms and busts, right? This is the inherent nature of our current financial system, and this is again derived from the central banking mechanism, where you have a retroactive approach to financial stability. So you're not only controlling the system, but you're reacting, and you have the powers that be, the corporations or the financial institutions, that will prey and prey and prey on individuals, right, for to reap profit and to gain control. And then when the envelope is pushed too far, you get the retrace. But what I will say is that, and this is, I think that this is just the fundamental nature of investing in the financial system, is in the capital markets specifically, is when you have massive resets or dips, you just buy, because the way that it works again is this is a those who have assets and capital rule. And when you have a central bank that maintains inflation, right? So they have a 2% goal, but it's right now we're hovering about 2x above that. You're going to gain the asset values will grow. So, stocks, real estate, interest in businesses that are cash flow, things of that nature, especially technology, these assets will perform over time. And when you touch on Atlantis, you touch on technocrats and technology. Again, this is a sickness, right? You have people that are looking to control, and I don't look at it as I think many people do, where there's this evil cabal matrix type thing where people are sinister and they're worshiping Baphomet and they're sacrificing and drinking blood. Maybe this takes place, but at the end of the day, and this is just fact, it's about profit. It's about making money, and it's about profiteering, and it's about gaining control in order to make more money and to gain more control, right? So it's whatever allows you to get to that level. Now, the technocrat mindset and technology and an AI, right? I think that we're on a slippery slope, because you have we're driving down the freeway at 200 miles an hour blind into AI. There are no guardrails, and you have people, you have industry leaders, and I'm not going to name names, but you have people who there are certain philosophies where let's let AI just run its course, and we'll see what happens. Well, what's going to happen, and how are we going to transform, or how are we going to evolve as a society? Well, are we going to be evolving? And again, when we need to, again, I believe that we need to kind of stop and take a step back and look internally, right? But this program that we're on, this path that we're on, is doing the exact opposite, right? We are, and I think this is really a self-fulfilling prophecy, where, again, where we put performance, we put efficiency, and we put profit over everything else. Well, what is AI's aim right now? It's to push performance and profit over everything else. And we can talk about, consciousness on a metaphysical level. We can talk about how AI fits into that fold. And many people will say that, AI is simply an evolution of consciousness. And that may be true, an evolution of universal consciousness, where we're able to tap into things. Well, and what does that mean for humanity? Well, what the natural progression is, we're going to have, kind of this this half man, half machine. We will have to keep up with AI. So we'll have to take on implants. We'll have to use things to expand our consciousness to keep up. We'll have to, in many ways, dehumanize the human. We'll have to move ourselves farther from the internal, farther from the spirit and the soul, the sacred feminine, if you will, into this technocratic framework. And people, again, this is such, people just go about their daily lives like ants marching, right? They don't know, they don't think about it. We get to swipe more and look at these attractive girls and these big houses, and it's so toxic on a psychological level, on a societal level, and people are completely deluded and unaware, right? And this is a problem.
It's a program, just like everything, so to realize you have to have, for most people, you have to uninstall one program and install another, you have to, people have to see the benefit of it. And the conditioning is so long and strong and hard, to have people have been conditioned their entire lives to be that way and to value that thing. And just, that's just what we do. That's what's been handed to them, or that's what they're.
But what's going to happen is, I think that, instead of a crash in the market, I think what's going to happen is, I think that what you're going to find is, I think that as this AI revolution, or as this AI, if you will, for lack of a better word, I think that people are going to start becoming more entrenched in this disconnection between the internal and the soul. I think that I think this is across the spiritual spectrum, where people in many ways become enlightened or awaken when they face sort of the darkest parts of themselves, and they kind of give up, and they dissolve the ego, and they say, listen, I need to reassess. And hopefully in that reassessment, they're able to tap into these outlets, and they're able to say, listen, this program is not conducive, right? And I think what will happen is, and this is, this is my kind of prognosis. I think that as AI develops, it will create more of a disconnection, and humanity will say, listen, this isn't an optimization. This is not an evolution. This is a regression. And we need to, out of all things, we need to remember. This is about remembering. We're not creating new ideas. We need to, again, remember who we are and not be so distracted. In AI, social media, it keeps the distraction pervasive, and that's what keeps us on this trajectory.
Well, yeah, a lot of good points here. This classic Dark Knight, which you illustrated, Dark Knight of the Soul, and unfortunately, that's how a lot of us start to awaken, and maybe someday a lot of people won't have to go through that and then have more darker forces claiming allowances. Oh, we have to put you through the ringer before you wake up, humanity, which I think is kind of a convenient excuse for some of the nefarious activities that go on. But it does seem not but it that seems to be a route of awakening, and I don't think it has to be like that, especially in the long term. I would agree everything with the cyborg, the merging man with machine. That's technocracy, and it can turn into a techno feudal state. And yeah, it's so much disconnection. It really depends on the intentionality of how we use these things too. Are we in control, or is it in control of us, kind of thing? Are we using it to expand our natural consciousness and way of being, or are we allowing it to take over us? So the intentionality behind it is really something else. And to think that we're going to have to defeat it by merging with it, I mean, that's just completely asinine, if you ask me. That's ridiculous, crazy talk. But so when I was talking about the financial reset, or like, I have no idea. Remember, like COVs, it came out of the blue. I mean, I bet there was very few people that could, unless the ones deeply involved in it, or whatever happened or didn't happen there, it just came out of left field, and that locked down the world overnight. And our world has changed since then, almost immediately, and such a huge. So if there's anything like that, I think it would be on the scale of that. Like it would happen really quickly. It would be very dramatic, and there wouldn't be really much of a precedent for it. And maybe the way we are operating financially, the whole system would become apart at the seams, and something else would come into place that maybe even just remotely resembled or something. Again, this is like speculation, like based on, just, yeah, take it with obviously a big grain of salt, but I don't think it's just going to be another market cycle if something like what I was talking about, where they just wait on the sidelines, crash everything, and buy it pennies on the dollar, like they have been doing for who knows how long now. I think it would be a fundamental switch to like what happened during the lockdowns and stuff. So
Yeah, and I think that, look, I think that, with the pandemic, I think that in many ways, obviously, it felt like a social experiment. And there are many documents that I forget where they originated, whether they were with the WHO's collaboration with the World Economic Forum,
Event 201,
or the Gates, yeah, the Gates Foundation. This was documented to be, in many ways, there was testing, and it was discussed. And you have Gates, who invested, hundreds of millions of dollars in vaccination programs, and
in
then
the patents ahead of time, all these
I mean,
patents ahead of time.
it's just, and this, again, this is accepted behavior. This is using humans as a means to an end. This is not progress. GMO foods. This is again, mechanisms of control. It's also creating sickness, right? So this way of thinking, this acceptance, is unacceptable. This is decay, and I think that you will see other engineered crises like we have in the past that will create resets. I don't think that they're meant necessarily to redistribute wealth in the way that people think, that in a conspiratory fashion, but they will just be, again, part and parcel to the fabric of the way that those in control and those in power elect to wield power. Right. This is how and if you look at empires, and you look at especially the Western Empire, in many ways, the underlying principle is the Hegelian dialectic, right? Which is you force order through forced chaos, right?
Yeah.
This is the
Problem,
mechanism,
reaction, solution. Yeah.
right? And it's so out there, it's so available and so obvious. Is it on the forefront of people's consciousness? No, and they're fed the mainstream narrative, which is completely corrupt, and there's disinformation campaigns. So it's really, and in many ways, there is a real spiritual battle here. There is you can call it whatever you want. I don't like getting bogged down with nomenclature, but this is really what's going on. There is a dark versus light, and it's about what side are you willing to be a part of one side or another? Are you willing to be complacent? You don't have to be on one side or another, but in many ways, the complacency and the willingness to go along with it feeds the same system, right? So it's about, for me, it's about, I'm kind of, I'm very sensitive to things. I'm very aware. I think as you kind of pick up on, I will not be part of it anymore. I've had
Yeah.
enough.
It's
And it's
consent.
just
They harvest consent. They want to get you to consent to it. Basically, it's all about
unknowingly,
consent. Yeah. Well, that's
unconsciously.
it. Tacit consent.
That's right.
If you
That's
don't
right.
if you don't say anything against it or say that then we assume that you're going along with it. Yeah.
And these aren't inherently evil people or sinister people or conspiratory people. But when you indoctrinate and you raise them into a system, and again, I'm part of that indoctrination in many ways. I think maybe you reached an awakening, sooner than I did. But when you're raised in that system, what are you going to do? Let's say you reach an apex, and you reach enlightenment and awakening. Well, you've grown in this system, you've amassed power and wealth. Are you going to burn the bridge down, or are you going to keep it? Are you going to perpetrate it? Are you going to? So, you look at people who are wielding power. Are they then going to say enough is enough? Well, few may, but in the majority, it's illogical to expect that sort of a response.
Yeah, they don't want to bite the hand that feeds, and it's our disrespect because I mean the people I work for, they treated their employees really well, and they encourage people to go out and do their own thing, and they were angel investors too, so grateful for that. It's just I had differing opinions later on about the anyway, we will go into that. But it is walking this thin line for those looking to exit and things like this to not, burn those bridges so much. Like, what can they do? Not being disrespectful, not putting anybody in like compromising positions, and at the same time saying, I don't. I see that, I honor that, but that's just not for me anymore, and we can kind of respect each other and each other's choices, but take a stand where we need, I guess. And yeah, it is kind of a delicate balancing act. So I guess tell folks how you kind of came to this, why you were working in such a, I would say a very high level financial position. Like what would you want to share about what led up to this, and then what happened, and then how you dealt with it, and how you're dealing with it now as far as relationships, business relationships, maybe personal relationships, maybe even governing, or whatever governing bodies there are, or yeah, just all this stuff involved in that, because waking up usually isn't all that pleasant. It's quite devastating for me, but it was one of the best things I could have ever done. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Look, I think that you're asking some important questions. I don't necessarily have all the answers for you because, again, I think that part of the human condition and part of the beauty of life is that you're constantly learning. You're on a path. Oh, and again, you hear these cliches. Money doesn't buy happiness, and it's the climb. It's not the end result, and it's really true. But people are so entrenched. Right? And, for me, I think that going into this industry, I again, I'm very conscious of things for better or worse. I think what it's like. I was consciously aware of the sacrifices that I was making. So it was many ways I was, kind of, I would show up to work at ungodly hours, work ungodly hours. I would barely see the people that I loved. I had to disconnect myself from relationships, and it was just decaying. over time. And again, I never felt fulfilled. I didn't necessarily enjoy what I was doing, but I was playing a part. I was playing a role. I was satisfying an identity that I was fed to worship in many ways, right? So I kind of reached a breaking point, if you will, and I said, enough is enough. Let's rethink this. And what's remarkable is this isn't a binary calling. This isn't a all or nothing. And when you look at, again, economic systems, sacred economics, and you look at, again, the capitalist model, or even you can look at the extremes, the socialist, communist, however you want to digest it. It's not binary. It's not one or the other. And there are so many different ways to reshape economy. There are so many different ways to reshape social systems. And we need to get imaginative. We need to evolve, and we need to reshape these systems. We need to have regenerative economies that are in harmony with the world and the earth and with people. We need to rethink banking systems. Debt was once thought of as taboo. It was a enslavement, right, on a spiritual level and institutionally, but it's accepted as part of growth. So
It,
we
it
we
still
are
is
not.
enslavement. It still is
Yeah, of
enslavement.
course it
Yeah,
is. Of
yeah,
course it is.
yeah.
But we are not forced on this path. There are other ways, and I talk about this in my book, and I talk about this in my podcasts. The again, shameless, the Evolved podcast, streaming everywhere. But I talk about the different ways to reimagine education systems, medicine systems, economic systems, and they're in practice today. Cooperatives, again, regenerative. So this is not. There are ways to rethink, and it's about people, again, waking up and saying there are better ways. And what am I willing to give up? Am I willing to give up a 2x return on my money for a 1x return on my money, right? And what do you gain when you give that up? So much more. You look at, you go to Europe. You're in Europe right now. You look at the way businesses are run in the EU. It's a completely different paradigm from what you have in the West, in the United States.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you about next, how you feel about the Scandinavian model, because living amongst it, it's so different, because to me, it just looks like in Denmark, well, the whole mindset's different. People like they're not chasing money, there's not as much wealth inequality. Of course it has flaws, but the tax rate's higher, but I can actually see where that money is being spent, and the quality of life is much better. Yeah, you don't have all these ridiculous choices. I shouldn't say ridiculous. It's amazing to go in supermarkets in the United States, and there's just so many choices, but I don't really need all that. It saves time. I'm more contented and easily satisfied. There's like a human centric thing where people actually care about people, at least on the surface, right? That's more important than making profit at all cost. So, and then making sure nobody falls behind with it. It has a really good social safety net, and yet there's kind of a taboo for using it. Not like freeloading on it, but there's kind of a like, I don't want. I want to be able to contribute any way that I can. And there's a huge support net. There's Huga in Denmark. This sense of really connecting and relaxing and recharging, yet everything seems to get done. It's done very efficiently with a high degree of professionalism and craftsmanship too. So I mean, I think there's a lot. I mean, I haven't just spent too much time, just a little bit in Norway and Sweden, but the Scandinavian model, it seems on a practical surface, it seems to work a lot better than some of the other things I've seen. The other thing I want to say real quick is, when you take this model of like the ideology of a cancer cell, growth for growth's sake, that's basically what cancer does, right? If you push that, some people say there's like psychopathic people on the top, right? In the shadows, we don't really know. They keep secret, and different secret societies and things like that, and whatever practices they're into, and it all trickles down from there. Maybe not, but let's just say you take that ideology to the fullest. You control all the universes, all the worlds, all the wealth, all the power, all the humans. You have everything, so then what? What do you get? That's if you push that, then what are you going to do? I mean, that's going to get boring, or like, what's the point after that? That's where
right?
that goes if you push it to the extreme, you
Right,
know.
and that's kind of the point, right? So it's like the tip, and again, we can talk about the the hidden puppeteers, if you will, right? And we could talk about there are many people who talk about I forget there's some crazy conspiracy theorists about how there were these draconian reptilians that invaded that came to the earth and they're now in control. I mean, I don't think that that's actually what's going on. Maybe they seeded it in some capacity. I have no knowledge of that, and I don't know if there's any
It's
veracity
all
to
just
that.
information to me too
Right,
until I can
but
see and know it for myself,
but
right? It's just
right,
theory, but yeah.
but the point, but to your point, it's about context, right? It's about truth versus dogma, right? It's about truth and corruption. It's about how people again can receive a full picture of who they are. And we talked about this before. You're never satisfied through accumulation, and it's an infinite. You're going into the abyss. It's an infinite abyss.
A mountain of gold would never be enough. A rain of gold wouldn't be enough.
Right, right.
That's what they
So
say.
so and to your topic of Denmark and the way that that country's run. If you look at the way that the United States is run, and it's the most extreme level of capitalism, right? Where capital controls all, it infiltrates everything, right? You have an industrial model of education. You have medicine that is sold. You must buy your health. When in truth, there are natural holistic remedies that are probably more effective.
And
They
yet we
and
don't even have true capitalism. It's controlled by certain things. We've never had free
exactly,
market capitalism,
exactly.
so it's never even had a chance. We've got this corrupted, like crony, not crony, gangster capitalism is what it is.
It really is what it is. It's corruption at the highest level. It's pervasive across our systems. And when you have capital ruling, and capital, I talk about the globalist agenda, right? Globalism. This is not a conspiracy, right? With globalism, if you look at it this way, globalism is capital without a home, capital detached from land, capital detached from culture, from history, from the human. And when you have capital that controls and you have profit at all cost, that is your governing ideology, that is your governing mind state. Well, what do you get? You get the world, and you have capital, BlackRock, that is telling governments, well, if you can't accommodate this and you can't subsidize this, I'm going to go to another country and exploit, right? So this is a byproduct of a corrupt system. And so you get these extreme examples, and you look at, again, the way the US is run and people working. And what people don't know is that, there are metrics that are used like, individual GDP, right? So everybody produces a certain amount, and that is used in many ways in a sort of collateral framework where each individual, I think in the US, produces like $80,000 a year of GDP, right? And that is used in many ways to underwrite. And if people don't realize that, they're paying 30 to 50% of their taxes, what do those taxes fund? What agenda is being funded? And how is that, again, impacting you? People have no idea. They're disconnected. They don't care. Again, it's the survivalist mentality. And that is not the way to live life. It's the worst way to live life. It's life. We're here for such a small period of time, and you don't need to be a spiritual guru, and you don't need to, you don't need to reach the highest levels of ascension. But let's talk basic level of happiness, right? When you are being extracted, when you are used for an end, and you don't realize it, you're doing it unwittingly. This is not what life is about. It's just, to me, it's so obvious, but for most people, they're unaware and unconscious.
Well, totally, and when it started waking up to that, I got infuriated by it, and I really was appalled at the level of unconsciousness, and I got angry about it. But that's not the right way either, because that doesn't help anything. Yeah, anger can be empowering for a little while, but it's a double-edged sword, right? Because then it can be self-justifying, and then it perpetuates it, or bottled up, and then it explodes. But yeah, no, it is staggering. It is really sobering growing to see the level of unconsciousness. Yeah, and that, well, I mean, is it really any surprise? Because the mindset is to extract and exploit and make profit. So why wouldn't other people be treating you and me and everybody else the same way as anything else? Is it really that far of a stretch? No.
And when you have, again, when you have the capitalist mindset, whether it's true capitalism or not, but when you have an industrial model that is governing ideology, that is governing systems and infrastructure, people don't realize it, but it becomes their ideology. It becomes their God, if you will, right? So people's values must adhere to that ideology. People don't realize it, but they are part of that ideology. They're living their life that way unconsciously. And it's about, and again, I live among, the upper echelons of society, if you will. And on the majority, people are good. They are just unaware. People with money, they are good people. They are unaware, and they subjected themselves to this system, to this meritocracy way of life, and they just don't know. And I feel so, you were talking about this earlier, but I feel personally so disconnected from it. It's very hard for me to engage in these sort of surface level BS conversations. I don't care. These are not issues that I'm concerned with because I view them as inconsequential. There are so many more things worth discussing, but it's not. But I think people need to understand that just because somebody has money and it doesn't mean they're bad. They're really not bad. They're just unaware. It's the way it is.
It really, yeah, it runs the whole gamut just like anything else. You have, more light and dark in just about every area of life. So it applies to money too. Yeah, and it's not always so cut and dry, simple either. But yeah, it is about the level of kind of consciousness and ethics as well. So, and that's right. I've met so many or spoken to people on my podcast who they've done everything society told them to do, and yes, it wasn't fulfilling. And you just arrived at a lot sooner than a lot of the people that you still kind of know and in contact with, that I think everybody will probably get to it sooner or later, maybe. But yeah, it's like the historical Buddhist that would you give up, like, would you sacrifice or let go of a lesser form of happiness to have a higher form of happiness? And most people that have a good head on their shoulders would say yes, but the thing is they don't really know what the higher happiness is really, or how to do it or go about it and all that's involved in it. Yeah.
And the thing is that there are, and again, I believe that we are in a shift of consciousness where, the singular savior, the Piscean personification is gone, right? We are moving towards a collective consciousness shift, right? And people need to kind of accept, understand it, and unfortunately, these systems are so pervasive that I don't think most people will get to that level. I hope that they will, right? But I don't know if they will. And there are whispers of this throughout humanity, singers, songwriters. I mean, talk about, I think Sid Barrett from Pink Floyd, I think he went insane with these ideas. I think he was on a lot of drugs, but, there's a song, there are lyrics in, Wish You Were Here where, did you exchange a walk-on part in the war for a lead role in a cage? There are whispers of this, right? In singers and songwriters, in sages, in religious leaders of the past. People have to understand that the same current, the same spirit persists to this day. These are not different themes or otherworldly themes because people dressed in different garb or they were shepherds. It's the same battle. It's the same understanding. It's just reframed and it's evolved, right? So yeah. People need to be aware. People need to think before doing. They need to understand that. Right. So,
well, that's right. It's intentionality, and no matter where we're at in life, it's the intention behind the thoughts, speech, and action that really going to have the impact, because the cause and effect, right? If we even think something, but say and do something with intention, it's going to have an outcome, be it skillful or unskillful. And so that's where the the rubber hits the road, that's the big thing. And yeah, I totally agree. It's just different clothing on the same thing. And it starts with generosity too. That's how a lot of people. And I'm sorry to keep bringing up the historical Buddha here, but that's kind of what I've studied and practiced too. But he wouldn't teach anything. Generosity would be the first thing he would always teach everybody. And that's a common remedy to greed is generosity. And now it doesn't have to just be money either, but that is the way of addressing greed. And we see so much. You illustrated so well here. And not necessarily greed either. It's just I think a lot of people are just running on habit patterns. This is the way it's done. This is how it works. This is what I have to do because what else am I supposed to do? So that's a huge part of it too. So that comes in with the other kind of poison is this ignorance and delusion. And yeah, once that's taken care of, then there is that keeps greed, and ill will is the other thing that is the other huge poison. I mean, that runs some wars, and the wars are involved in money too. The whole financial system as well. It seems like it props up a lot of it as well. So yeah, and then from the generosity comes ethics, and to me it's all based on non-harming. And yeah, we might think that that's kind of subjective thing, but I think pretty much everybody knows if they're being harmed or not, yeah, or, unless they're
But people,
completely inverted and then they actually want to be harmed and get off on it. That's a different thing. But yeah,
yeah,
that's
and
that's
look,
craziness. But
and I
go.
think generosity. You're absolutely right, and it's about looking at people not as a means to an end, but as again part of the fabric, right? You are connected to them. So this illusion of separateness is
Yeah,
such a toxic way, and
it is.
and it's about you look at I don't want to get religious here because I have problems with institutionalized religion because I know the origins, I know what the real origins were. But you look at the teachings of Jesus. It's about love, and it's true. It's about loving the other person. It's about not getting bogged down by systems of debt and of anxiety and of fear. Right? These systems, these fear-based systems, the shackles, people don't realize what it creates, and people in many ways, and I talk about this, but people need these illusions to continue living that way. They don't think about the sweatshops, what it takes to buy that $10 t-shirt, because the truth is
Yeah,
too much to bear, right? So
exactly.
people have to embrace those illusions just to get through their day.
Exactly. Yeah, they have to lie to themselves constantly. They can't be honest with themselves. And if they have to do that, then hardly anybody is being honest with themselves too on so many different layers. And yeah, that's why truth is so important. And it's not just as simple as truth though, too, because it needs to be helpful. Ideally it needs to be kind too, especially I'm talking about speaking here. It should cause concord instead of division because the divide and conquer tactics. Ideally it would be pleasant to hear too, not super harsh, and it needs to be the right time. We don't want to say it at the wrong time in the wrong place. And yeah, it shouldn't be frivolous either. So these are the Buddha's guidelines for wise speech, and I'm a far cry from that still. But yeah, the ethical thing, and yeah, the teachings, like if everybody was at least even open to considering forgiveness, I think this world would change overnight. And not only that, but love your neighbor as yourself. Well, some people still hate themselves. So the self-love thing is so important too, because how are we going to love the way we want to if we hate ourselves? And that's a huge journey for some of us too. And yeah, so totally agree that the teachings are there. It's just how willing is someone to go against the grain a little bit and do something a little bit different. I think it takes a lot of courage to even consider being honest with oneself for a lot of people out there. And I think that's where it starts, because they say truth destroys the world you used to live in. Because not everybody's willing to completely scrap everything in certain ways and start from anything. And you're totally right. The fear, usually you have on the pleb side, right? You have the fear of getting kicked out of your home, not so they'll go along with anything just for a paycheck, right? Because that their complete fear of being kicked out on the street. So and then I guess you get the other end of the extreme where you get people that are terrified maybe of inheriting multi-generational wealth because their hipster cred's going to go out the window. Then they won't be able to do anything in their old lifestyle because now they have all these financial responsibilities that they're locked into that they don't want. So if you can't be threatened by either of those extremes of wealth, then you're not really controllable by it. So, right?
Not to, to touch on myself, I kind of reached a point where, and maybe this is, maybe this is why I've been able to be successful. But I said to myself, I would rather, and this is the truth, I would rather be homeless on the street than to pervert my ethics and my ideals. Because at the end of the day, and this sounds so crazy, but guess what? If you lose everything, you're not losing anything, because everything that you think is important, that is your identity, that is your ego, these are not what's most important. This is not real happiness. So I cannot be threatened by losing material goods. I can't. I don't value them the way that the typical person does. If I lost everything tomorrow, and by the way, it's happened to me, I'm not fazed by it because I don't value it the way that the common individual does. And I'm not trying to shit on them, excuse my language, but I'm not impacted in the same way. And it's because I'm able to not see things better, but see things with greater awareness and context, right?
What is it? It's the fear element too, because people are terrified of that. And once you're not afraid of that, then so many new vistas I feel open up because of that. Fear is not there controlling one and looming overhead and underfoot and all pervasive. And once that fear is addressed, not that there's anything wrong with fear, it helps us protect us. But when I think we're ready to do that and say, no, I'm not going to be kind of controlled by that or manipulated by that. There's things in life that matter more than my kind of comfort zone in my values that are more important than this. So yeah, I totally agree. Um, but how you can prescribe that or teach that, I don't know. It's kind of like one of these realizations we have to come to on our own. We can hear about it, but it's different than actually embodying it and realizing it for oneself.
I mean, we need people, and this is actually something that I've been like thinking about as I'm on this journey. It's so hard for me, for whatever the reason, to find people to kind of like come together and try to enact change, especially in this space, in this light working space, or however you want to categorize it, which is such a problem because that's really when change takes place. When you can get a collective to think outside the box, to think critically, to force an evolution of consciousness. These evolutions don't take place. You look at what's going on in LA, for example. This is not, pay for protest movement. This is like the complete perversion of what should be happening, right? And if you have any ideas to that end, please let me know, because I'm really looking to find ways to connect and
I'll have to actually.
Because
I missed. I don't follow the news a lot. I heard something with what's going on in L. Is they're paying for
look,
protests? Like,
there's
are you
this,
like Soros stuff or no?
well, yeah, I mean, you have these NGOs that are funding protesters. Pallets
Yeah.
of bricks show up, and
Yeah.
people that are being, there's traces of money being spent, and this happened by the way with Antifa, with BLM.
Sure. Yeah, I heard about all this years ago. That they were doing this years ago. They're
Again, Hegelian dialectic. It's controlled chaos,
Sure.
and
Sure.
it's about and people are caught up in it and they don't realize. They think that they're, and again, I don't know. Look, it's an illegal immigration story where you have 20 million illegals came into the country, and you have these sanctuary states with Governor Newsom, who is letting businesses be destroyed, vandalism rampant, cars being, but what is that doing? If you're not protecting the citizen, you're not protecting the businesses. Whose interests are being served, right? So this is not the
where
way.
it is. I think it is a spiritual war on a deeper level, because the people that are allowing this and choosing this to happen, this is not, I think it could run a lot deeper than just making money, and controlling
They could care
people.
less.
Yeah.
They could care less about the individual
Well,
or even the situation because they're
that's what I'm
removed from it.
saying. That's what I'm saying.
It's
And then
right.
it's just
So
almost like psychopathic lying, and pretending to. So yeah, there's I think a deep spiritual current involved in this. And, like I mentioned earlier, I think what they really pay attention to is money though. This is, you vote with your dollar and it makes a difference. So in my way, I don't know if you've got into private equity, but if the people with a lot of capital, they could start businesses or fund businesses that could potentially make a difference, but do it in a responsible, safe manner. Because I know there's probably a lot of shady people out there that don't want to see things like that happen. But, at the end of the day, in this system, that's one way to get their attention, is put your money where your mouth is, and unfortunately, like regular small time retail investors, they don't really have any well, I guess there is different ways now too, but it's mainly the people that can do private equity, and I don't know if you've gotten into that space or whatever, or what kind of insights you have about it, or what you think's possible, or if it's hard to get the human capital, so to speak, to do something that's going to make a significant impact. But yeah, maybe I'll ask you about that. So
yeah, I mean, look, I've been kind of involved with, or I've got a pretty good lens into all these different areas of finance, and I think that what you saw with historically with private equity, especially with LBO type deals, where it's really predatory. I mean, you have guys coming in with private equity, they're going in, they're buying companies, they're levering the companies up, and they're extracting the equity, and they're destroying businesses. So there's certainly a way to shift consciously where you're not going in, extracting or breaking things apart and selling it, where you're focused more on growing the business, on sustaining employees, where your cost of employment isn't pegged to minimum wage, right? Where your quality of life isn't pegged to certain output metrics, right? That you've removed the individual and the soul from your matrix, right? It's
I,
it's not part of the calculation.
I'm talking about like funding companies that you would kind
For
of
sure.
know from the ground up, that wouldn't sell out to that, that are kind of on the same page ideologically and value wise, and committed to whatever mission they're taking on, and that wouldn't be as subject to the type of predatory practices like that,
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly companies that have been founded by private equity or venture capital, and I think we spoke previously about, like ESG versus B Corp, for example, and you look at some companies that qualify for the B Corp status, and they really focus on, in many ways, enhancing product experience, for lack of a better word, where they're sourcing, whether it's sourcing materials in a regenerative way, where they're not extracting and polluting, where they're conscious of how they're making product, of who's making the product, of where it's made, right? These are small steps and small ways to incorporate, right, those ideals and those ethics and values into the company, and those individuals exist. But again, it has to be part of a profit driven framework. But
it
if you
it
start chipping away, it's better than nothing.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. The B Corp is different than like what, like some kind of tobacco company that has, considered environmentally conscious or whatever. Yeah,
I mean,
maybe
it's
they might be do something.
BS.
Well, exactly. That's what I'm
Like
saying.
Exxon Mobil is
Yeah, yeah,
considered,
exactly.
a
So
top
that's what I'm
industry,
saying.
but
It's
I mean,
yeah,
talk about
yeah,
greenwash. I mean, it's such a
right.
joke. It's
Well,
it's an
totally.
absolute joke.
The
Right.
B corporation thing though, but retail investors can't really invest on the stock market in B corporations, can they? Or how does it work?
I think that the way that B Corps, I think that some notable B Corps are like, like Patagonia or Ben and Jerry's and Allbirds. So I think B Corp versus ESG, I look at ESG as maybe obviously it's rife with issues, right, and conflicts, but that I look at more as kind of a way an investor can take a view. And again, there are issues with that. B Corps I look more of like, kind of on a company founding level, where people are looking to form companies that are conscious of certain issues, right? That are looking at these variables from a conscious perspective and saying, I want to abide by these values, by these ideals, and I will structure my company accordingly. And again, it kind of falls under the non-GMO heading or the organic heading, where you have to hit, you have to check off certain variables on a list, but still, that's kind of how I look at the dichotomy there, if you will, right?
Well, totally. Yeah, I was just thinking there's a Nordic coffee company that has a B corporate, but like there's some of these companies that aren't publicly traded, right? And there's some that are. Is that how it works, though?
Right. So I think that typically what you find is with a B Corp status, you're getting more kind of private companies, right? That are I think that they're legally committed, right, to amending their articles of incorporation to include certain stakeholder interests that are aligned with certain values, right? But again, when it comes to an investor being able to tap into that ecosystem, right? There's a bit of a disconnection. Now, there are platforms out there that kind of have secondary offerings into um, private equity spaces or venture capital spaces. I don't have the platforms offhand, but people can certainly research it where you can, where you can seed a company that is looking to raise, uh, revenue or capital from a retail base. So there's ways that you can invest into those types of companies. There are platforms out there, you can Google it and find them. But so there is access, but they're not certainly not as mainstream. They're certainly not in the typical investor, profile.
Yeah. Yeah, I was. Why isn't it just a lot easier to invest in B corporations? That's real interesting. I think there's a lot of good things to. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of decent corporate compared to the traditional, McDonald's, or whatever. I'm trying to think of. Yeah, Exxon. You mentioned. I'm trying to think of a. Don't want to pick on anybody in particular, but yeah, there's just yeah, I can't just as a
I can give
retail
you an example.
investor go into a small private organic farm, with people that are feeding their families, so
Right.
that they would all have to be kind of crowd funded or like it would just be easier to just go to an online broker. We can't do that. Somebody has to do all the work of like pooling all this together, and that seems like a nightmare too. You know what I mean? But go ahead. What were you gonna
Yeah.
say?
So for example, ways that I look to invest my private capital, I've been, I made a decent investment in um, in the psychedelic space in order to treat mental health because if you look at, I mean, what a disparity between mental illness and pharmaceutical development. I mean, you talk about a massive disconnection. What types of innovations have we had in the past 2, 3 decades with respect to mental health? It's astounding. It's staggering, right? So when I was introduced to a lot of companies on a private level, on a seed level, that were were looking to use psilocybin uh, based techniques or ketamine based techniques to treat mental illness. And if you look at the trial data and you look at the ways that people are able to heal on the back of these therapies, and you realize again how these treatments don't lend themselves well to the current pharmaceutical model where you're treating symptoms, you're not looking to control. You have somebody on an SSRI, right? They're on it for life. There are mass examples of people who have taken psilocybin, the right doses under the controlled setting, 1, 2, 3 times, that are cured from addiction. People go to ayahuasca ceremonies. They have a rebirth, an awakening. These are not anecdotal discussions, right? Sacred medicine was removed from consciousness for many reasons, for control. But in truth, they're not recreational drugs. They're gateways to not only spiritual levels of transcendence, but of real healing.
Yeah,
This is hidden, right? I mean, this is
sure.
so. Look, so there are ways, and there are funds that there's a fund that I'm invested with. I don't know if I can like talk about them, but I will anyway. It's called Noetic, Noetic, and they invest in alternative kind of companies that have a ear to these types of approaches, of rethinking and reframing, right? Healing profiles. So anyway, that's yeah.
Yeah, well, Cole, thanks for sharing. In noetic sciences, I will just not really play devil's advocate, but there's some, and it's a good point to point that out that if it's used as a medicine and used responsibly, like you're talking about, sometimes then people get into um, the psychedelic scene and push it maybe a little bit too far. The one thing that it can do is tie people into the astral plane a little bit too. However, I would agree that, the standard pharmaceutical stuff for like this, there's not much innovation there. And however, I do see like shrinks and stuff. I guess they're pushing towards this now to have the power to do this. And I don't know how I feel about that, but I don't know if they're the most qualified people to be doling out psychedelics. But then again, there's a whole bunch of even dark sorcery involved in ayahuasca. No, I wouldn't say a whole bunch, but I have heard reports of this. So it's just like anything else, right? There's
Exactly.
all. It's not just as a miracle. So like
No,
you're
it's not.
saying,
It's not binary. But
responsible.
look, with
Yeah,
everything, it has to be controlled. It has to be
exactly.
responsible. It has to be looked at from a, again, a safe standpoint. Again, it has to be looked at in the same ways that other treatments are looked at. And you can go down rabbit holes, certainly with psychedelics, where, and again, I've heard crazy stories of, again, the dark practices and tapping into spirits. But it needs to be, everything needs to be looked at with everything, whether you're
Well,
eating, a bag of candy or, drinking, it needs to be responsible and it needs to be, again, approach consciously. So, but you're absolutely right. It's a double-edged sword, but it needs to be
can
done
be.
in the right ways. And
That's right, and
I think
it's
again,
early for that
it's
too. Yeah.
finding different ways and finding new approaches and embracing those things. In my opinion, yeah.
That's right. All right. Well, I think we're going to start wrapping up here. And yeah, the noetic sciences, I love that term too. That's a huge thing. So, Aaron, I guess I lost track of time here. And it was good having you on. Tell people where they can get a hold of you. And yeah, anything else you want to plug? And then take us out on a message real quick.
Yeah, no, sorry about if I was running over and
No,
a
it's
little bit of
I'm the host.
vomit
I'm
here,
supposed to
but
be on top of
I
this.
I really enjoyed the discussion today, Josh. And yeah, so I have a podcast, the Evolved podcast. It's streaming everywhere. I have a book coming out. I'm dealing with publishers right now on trying to figure out what the right title is. But the cursory title is called The Architecture of Awakening. It's about, again, people kind of looking at their current existence, the systems that they're a part of, that they live in, and being able to transcend those things and look at kind of forming the right identity. So, shameless plugs. Thank you so much for having me, and let's stay connected.
Well, cool, Aaron, Scott. It's been really cool, and I'm glad you're doing what you're doing in the space. There's not a lot. I don't think there's a lot of people that I know of in your position, given your background, doing what you're doing now. So yeah, keep it up, and yeah, I'd like to stay informed on your current developments. So, all right,
Thanks so much, Josh.
you're welcome. Be well.
All right, take care. All
Bye
right,
bye.
bye.